She doesn't command anything, let her sit with the crew. That was the line my brother's bride fired off, pitched perfectly so the entire reception heard it. I didn't twitch, didn't defend myself, didn't give her the satisfaction. My mother adjusted her necklace, pretending she hadn't heard. My father studied the ceiling. And my own brother, the one I'd flown across the country to stand beside on his wedding day, kept his mouth shut. That silence, sharper than any weapon I ever carried in combat, told me everything. To them I was still just the cadet who fetched water on field drills, not the decorated officer who had orchestrated the defense contract their entire merger depended on. They thought I was here as an afterthought, a seat filler. They didn't realize I was the only one with authority to finalize the $30 million agreement they were banking on. So I smiled, steady and cold, lifted my phone and spoke 3 words, terminate the deal. The fallout was instant. My brother stiffened, my mother went ghost white, the new bride froze mid-breath. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't justify. I didn't rage. I simply stood and walked out, taking their future with me. And if you believe that was the end of the battle, you're mistaken. Stay close, because what followed wasn't just retribution, it was a full campaign. I had arrived at that wedding 15 minutes ahead of schedule. Not out of joy, but out of the military habit of showing respect even when none is returned. My boots clicked against the marble of the grand hall, echoing in a room where no one acknowledged me. No nods, no greetings. It was the same as always. Captain Adriana Cole, present but invisible. The venue was dressed to impress. Orchids suspended from gold arches, glass bowls with floating candles, everything manicured into a display of money and control. It was exactly how my brother Nathan and his polished wife Camille wanted it. Perfect optics, total order. And still, some naive part of me hoped that maybe, just maybe, this day might be different. I scanned the front tables for my place card. My aunt glanced at me and turned away mid-smile. A cousin offered a tight grin, then drowned herself in wine. Not hostility, just disregard. Which somehow cut deeper. Then my eyes hit the seating chart. Calligraphy names under neat table numbers. Nathan and Camille at table 1. My parents at table 2. The bridal party at table 3. Friends, neighbors, teachers, all accounted for. Except me. I searched twice, but my name wasn't there. A planner with a clipboard drifted over, offering a brittle smile. Captain Cole, yes, table 14. 14. Near the service doors, she added, voice too bright, too quick. I didn't protest. I already knew who had made the adjustment. I made my way to the back, to a table tucked beside the swinging kitchen doors. The tablecloth wrinkled, silverware mismatched. 2 caterers sat there on break, laughing until they noticed me and scrambled up. Before I could reassure them, I heard Camille's voice, polished, venomous, calculated. She doesn't command anything, let her eat with the staff. She didn't need to shout. The volume was exact, sharp enough to cut across the music. Heads turned. There she stood, arm looped through Nathan's, surrounded by friends in flawless gowns and tailored suits. My mother pretended to fuss with flowers. My father buried his hands in his pockets. Nathan and I locked eyes for a moment, and then he looked away. That was the confirmation. This was an oversight. It was strategy. They saw me as a liability, an expendable soldier in their staged parade of perfection. The burn rose behind my eyes, but I kept my face calm. I gave them a smile, not strained but deliberate, lethal. I pulled my phone, thumb steady from years of training, no hesitation, no falter. Dialed 1 number. Shut it down, I said. Pause. Copy that, came the reply. The call ended. Behind me, a spoon clattered to the floor. Something in the air shifted, though no one yet knew why. I moved through the hall with purpose in every step. Nathan's jaw tightened, but no words came. My mother half reached for me. My father's eyes narrowed, suspicion dawning. Camille froze mid-sip, glass trembling. They didn't yet understand the battlefield had already shifted, that their precious $30 million contract was gone. I was no longer just Adriana, the overlooked daughter blurred in the edges of family photos. I was the commander they underestimated, the strategist they dismissed, and now the woman who had just marched out carrying their empire on her back. I left the ballroom silent, posture sharp, breathing even. Let them toast their hollow triumph. I had larger wars to fight. I didn't break when I crossed that threshold. Not then. Not yet. The sting would come later in private. For now my mind replayed what I already knew. The insult, the indifference, the betrayal. None of it surprised me. It had been drilled into me long before this wedding, before Camille, before contracts. When I was 8, I was branded the quiet one. Not because I lacked words, but because my words carried no weight in a house built on volume and ego. Nathan, older by 2 years, was the golden boy. Loud, magnetic, impossible to ignore. I was book-smart, disciplined, a girl who followed through. But no one rewarded competence when charisma filled the room. At school I stacked medals and ribbons, debate, science fairs, marksmanship, but my parents never came to a single ceremony. Nathan scraped by in algebra and immediately got a private tutor. When I asked for help on college applications, my father waved me off. "You'll figure it out. You always do." Nathan had a team reviewing his essays and prepping him for interviews. Love in my house was measured in attention, and Nathan consumed all of it. I adapted. Learned to thrive in silence. No rebellions, no tantrums. Just quiet efficiency. When our father launched Iron Veil Defense, Nathan was handed a title, a desk, a box of business cards. I was juggling classes and part-time shifts, offering to help with logistics, vendor negotiations, operational planning. "We'll call you when we need you," my father said. They didn't. Not until the market collapsed and Iron Veil Defense teetered on the brink. Our father was gone by then, and Nathan had no idea how to steady the ship. That was the first time he called me, not as a sister but as a last resort. I slipped in without ceremony, tightening every bolt in the operation, cutting waste, redrawing the financial playbook. Within months the ship was steady. No medals, no title, no applause. When the company breathed again, Nathan was on television declaring, "We adapted." I made the hard calls. My name wasn't spoken. It never was. At home the cycle repeated. Nathan missed curfew and I got chewed out. He left doors unlocked and I was scolded for not being vigilant. One Thanksgiving he drove drunk into a neighbor's fence. My mother wept, my father thundered, and then, like clockwork, they turned to me and demanded how I could let it happen. I was stationed 3 hours away at the academy. It didn't matter. In their eyes I was the mop, the fixer, the one who erased the stain and vanished until called again. Even at family gatherings it was the same drill. Nathan strolled in late, recycled his tired stories, spouted half-truths, and the room lit up with laughter. I tried once to pitch an idea for a veterans incubator I'd been planning. My mother cut me off mid-sentence. My father passed the potatoes. Nathan cracked a joke about my old Jeep and everyone roared. That was when I stopped offering words. Not out of bitterness, out of calculation. Some tables aren't set for you. You're only expected to serve and retreat. For years I tried to decipher it. Was I too rigid, too blunt, too lacking in charm? The truth was simpler. It wasn't about flaws, it was about roles assigned at birth. Nathan was the chosen heir. I was the fallback. He was the poster boy. I was the insurance policy. He got the glory, I carried the foundation. That night outside the hotel, watching tuxedoed guests sip champagne under glittering lights, I realized they had never actually seen me. They recognized the silhouette, not the substance. They exploited my precision but never gave it a name. They demanded loyalty but never offered it back. I was always the one who knew what had to be done but was told to stay silent. The one who read every clause while others toasted. The one who said yes because it was duty, not because it was acknowledged. But that was finished. The day I realized their entire legacy was stacked on my silence was the day I accepted recognition would never come. After every midnight grind, every budget salvaged, every disaster I intercepted, they still crowned Nathan the savior. And they always would. When my father died, I thought maybe grief might shift the balance. Maybe they'd remember who kept Iron Veil Defense alive while Nathan fumbled. When numbers didn't add up, when even the generals on the board were ready to walk. I hoped loss would strip the illusions. Instead it erased me. The will named Nathan CEO without pause. No temporary role, no consideration for the one who had saved the mission. The board muttered about continuity. Translation: Nathan had the familiar face and I was just the quiet soldier in the shadows. I smiled through the announcement, shook hands, endured the hollow compliments. You've been invaluable behind the scenes. But insight isn't ownership. Strategy without credit is nothing. Silence isn't consent. In truth, the collapse had begun months before Father's passing. Iron Vale was burning and Nathan called me in desperation. "We're 30 days from collapse," he said. I could hear the panic in his voice. It was closer to 15. The office looked abandoned. Empty desks, staff on edge, vendors unpaid. I had to work. I launched emergency audits, cut duplicate contracts, cleaned the bleeding. I reached out to 3 investors I'd built trust with over years of backroom talks. They believed me, not Nathan's title. 17 million came in within 3 weeks. Payroll cleared, lights stayed on, confidence returned. Nathan went back to boardrooms and cameras. I went back to my nameless desk, still just advisor, fixer. A month later, a magazine cover splashed Nathan's square jaw under the headline, "The Young CEO Who Saved His Father's Legacy." My name wasn't in the article. Not once. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "That's how it is. Reporters simplify. It's about the brand." What he meant was, your work matters but your name doesn't. After the funeral, the board convened without me. I learned of the restructure in a mass email. Nathan was CEO, the vote unanimous. My title didn't shift, my duties didn't shift, but my visibility shrank even further. Meetings passed without me. Strategy rooms filled without my chair. And no one challenged it. The handful who remembered how close Iron Vale came to death muttered apologies. "It's politics, you understand." I did understand. It was the same battlefield, just a bigger map. So I went quiet. I stopped patching Nathan's mistakes before they grew. I watched him stumble through presentations I used to draft. I listened to him contradict himself in calls I once scripted. He was still playing the role handed to him, but even he knew he hadn't earned it. Meanwhile, I built my own network. Side partnerships. Private meetings under my own name. No more ghostwriting, no more standing in the shadows of someone else's speech. Every connection I forged from then on was mine. Sometimes I wanted to slam my fist on the table, not for applause but because the truth deserved oxygen. I had carried that company when it was seconds from collapse. I had convinced battle-hardened investors to believe again. And still I was a ghost in the story. But I didn't explode. I didn't walk out in fury. Fury burns fast. Power waits. And I knew the exact moment to strike. It arrived with a photograph. Nathan's face beside a woman I barely recognized, splashed across every financial outlet. The headline read, "Iron Vale CEO to wed heir to the Fairmont dynasty." Her name was Eleanor Fairmont. Her father Victor was a legendary investor, the kind who swooped in with life-saving cash but only on his terms. And Iron Vale was bleeding again. Nathan hadn't fallen for Eleanor. He'd fallen for her father's bankroll. I stayed silent at first. If he wanted to marry a checkbook, fine. But then I got a call from a legal ally, someone who owed me a favor. He'd been asked to draft a clause in the merger paperwork. A clause that required not only the CEO's signature, but also that of the co-founder. A role never mentioned publicly but written clearly in the documents. My role. The Fairmonts weren't fools. They'd researched. They knew who had actually kept Iron Vale alive. They didn't trust Nathan alone. They wanted my pen on the page. That's when the puzzle locked in. This wasn't romance. It was contract. My brother's bride-to-be was nothing more than a dowry. Me. I was the final condition. They didn't even tell me. I learned it from paperwork. No seat at the table, no voice in the talks, just a line at the bottom where my name was supposed to go. They expected me to smile, sign, and disappear. At a pre-wedding dinner, they played their theater of unity. Nathan introduced me to Eleanor like I was an aide. "This is my sister Adriana. She keeps things running behind the curtain." Her handshake was soft, her eyes razor-sharp. Victor sat at the head, speaking little, measuring everything. After the toast, he approached me. He didn't ask my thoughts, didn't acknowledge my stake. He said, "We're counting on your cooperation to make this alliance seamless." Not a request. An order. I nodded, but inside something cracked. Not rage, not yet. It was the weight of being weaponized by your own blood. Overlooked I could endure. Forgotten I could stomach. But this was designed. They weren't just using me. They were erasing me. As I turned to leave, Nathan cornered me. "Don't complicate this. It's a formality. We need this deal." I looked at him, really looked. He was still that boy who begged me not to tell Dad when he wrecked his bike. Still the man who let me rebuild Iron Vale without a single thank you. His suit was sharper now, hair grayer, but inside he hadn't changed. He still thought everyone around him existed to shield him. I gave him no answer. I walked out, heels steady on marble, head high. I already knew my move. Not for him. Not for Eleanor. Not for Victor. For me. On the morning of the signing, I rose early. The air felt too still, as if the world held its breath. The documents were spread across my desk, pen waiting. The board had already approved. Nathan had already celebrated. My signature was the final piece. Safe, they called it. I didn't know who we meant anymore. I sat with coffee cooling at my side, staring at the page, convincing myself this was just ink. Just another transaction. Then my inbox pinged. A forwarded chain. The subject line looked routine. Signature confirmation. But the thread below stopped me cold. Eleanor had accidentally copied me on a message meant for Nathan. Once she signs, she's finished. No more babysitting. She won't matter after this. I read it twice, then again, hoping the words would soften. They didn't. They were surgical, smug, deliberate. My chest tightened. My hands trembled. I hadn't expected thanks, but I hadn't expected open contempt either. All those years I'd convinced myself being used was better than being discarded. Now I understood. I was always meant to be discarded. This was never about partnership. It was about silencing me permanently. For 30 seconds they needed my name. After that, I was nothing. ChatGPT said. After that revelation, the tremor in my fingers stilled, my back straightened, and an unexpected laugh slipped from me, not out of humor but from clarity. It was the kind of laugh a soldier gives when the enemy reveals their true hand, thinking the battle is already won. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the papers as though they were written in cipher. This was never my legacy. It was theirs, built on deceit, wrapped in lace, paraded as brilliance. And here I was, invited only to surrender it all with a single signature before being discarded. Eleanor had exposed herself entirely in one arrogant line. Nathan didn't need to reply. His silence was confirmation enough. I was never meant to be part of their future. I was just a temporary tool. I closed the folder, calm and deliberate, and forwarded the email to my personal counsel with a single note. Hold everything. Then I rose, straightened my jacket, and walked out, leaving the pen untouched, the contract unsigned. Somewhere across the city, Nathan was likely refreshing his inbox, certain I'd play the obedient soldier yet again. But this time I had no intention of handing over power to those who treated me as dead weight. Not today, not ever. They believed they had boxed me in. Instead, they had handed me the detonator. When I refused to sign, the day itself seemed ordinary, sunlight steady, air quiet, as if the world thought it would continue unchanged. I knew better. I sent a short note to my lawyer, closed the folder, and stepped away from the desk with a steadiness I hadn't felt since the battlefield. Let them think I would fold by noon. Let them whisper that I'd come around. They didn't understand. I had already built my way out long before the Fairmont engagement and its crystal-wrapped threats. It hadn't begun with some master scheme. It started with small, careful deployments where no one else dared to invest. A shell company with an unremarkable name, a trust handled by a discreet lawyer who never smiled for cameras, and a handful of allies willing to put their names on records where mine would have raised alarms. A lifetime of being overlooked had taught me how to weaponize invisibility. The first founders I backed met me at a diner near the rail station because they couldn't even afford parking downtown. A husband and wife team with a product no one wanted to touch. Software that bored most investors but made the sleepless bank CTOs lean in. Every fund had rejected them. I listened, asked them to walk me through their worst-case scenarios twice, then wrote a check through Harbor 12 Holdings, my quiet entity that never made glossy lists. 18 months later, their system ran quietly behind 3 banks, and they drew real salaries for the first time. When they called to celebrate, they didn't thank an institution. They thanked me by name. Then came Ruth, who bought crumbling warehouses and transformed them into clinics and training centers. Then Ahmed, who built a payment system that guaranteed contractors their wages by sundown instead of after the weekend. Then Alondra, who created a microloan program that didn't drown single mothers when a tire blew on the way to work. None of them fit conference slides. All of them served the forgotten. I didn't demand stages. I demanded clean paperwork, voting rights if things went sideways, and guardrails that stopped profit from turning into rot. Sometimes I observed. Sometimes I vanished from the frame entirely. My name never appeared in press releases, but it lived in the contracts. What I was building wasn't a single fortress. It was a lattice, silent, interwoven, resilient. A fintech strand here, a logistics outpost there, a property in a neglected district. Every refusal to sign for Nathan only tightened my own web. Returns cycled into new ventures. Teams grew. Payroll cleared without delay. And every quarter I updated a spreadsheet no one but me would ever see. Not as a scoreboard but as discipline. Discipline keeps power from curdling into appetite. Back at Ironvale, my composure was misread. They assumed I lingered because I had nowhere else to go, because I was grateful to sit near their table. They mistook silence for surrender. They didn't understand. Silence had been my camouflage, and patience is not submission. When Nathan drafted his grand digital expansion memo, I read it 3 times. The vendors he touted as linchpins, NectarPay for instant transfers, Northline Core for integrations, a compliance firm automating due diligence, were all companies I had nurtured when no one else would. He thought his in-laws had unearthed them. He didn't know their CEOs still texted me before signing any major deal. One afternoon, as the engagement chatter flooded inboxes, my phone buzzed with a message under a name misspelled on purpose. Ironvale wants a 12-month exclusivity with Northline, the founder whispered. It'll choke out a community bank we're supporting in the valley. We wanted to check with you first. Behind him I could hear the chaos of a tiny office. Printers jamming, someone joking about a broken chair. I told him to protect the bank and if Ironvale wanted speed, to offer fair terms without swallowing others whole. He agreed. It wasn't about sabotaging. It was about reminding a company I once served that access doesn't equal entitlement. I didn't need to shout. The contract spoke. The net drew tighter. A logistics firm I had pulled through a brutal winter held a route Nathan needed. A data vendor Eleanor bragged about at luncheons relied on a model I'd funded at the Sketch on Whiteboard stage. A property Nathan planned to lease sat quietly under a portfolio I influenced. This didn't make me a puppet master. It made me the adult in a room where others forgot that growth requires roots. And my roots ran deeper than they imagined. People assumed I wanted Ironvale because I had bled for it. That was the old story, confusing sacrifice with ownership. What I wanted was integrity. Failing that, distance. And above all, enough leverage to refuse anything that harmed those who actually built the numbers others paraded on stage. So I stayed small in public. Methodical in private. I asked the dull questions. I read the appendices. I left early. I paid promptly. I kept my word even when unseen, especially then. The morning I declined to sign, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt prepared. Like a field after frost, dark soil rich and ready. If Nathan called my vendors, they'd answer, but they'd call me too. If Eleanor tried to exert power she hadn't earned, she'd learn quickly the difference between standing nearby and holding true stewardship. And if Ironvale wanted to build something honest, I would never block it. But if they thought they could buy my silence with a ring and a headline, they had gravely miscalculated. They used to joke I was a ghost behind their curtain. That amused me. I wasn't haunting, I was sewing. And the drawstring ran straight through my hands. The night before the wedding, the family gathered in a restaurant our father once loved. To outsiders it was pitched as warm and intimate, a dinner to honor what was coming. Under chandeliers, guests clinked glasses and laughed too loudly. But I felt it as soon as I walked in. The rehearsed smiles, the brittle cheer, the words chosen with surgical care. It was theater. A performance staged for the Fairmonts to prove we were unified. But unity had never lived here. My mother brushed me with a half-embrace that dissolved before it began. Her perfume was sharp, familiar, suffocating. She took her seat across the long table, pearls glittering in the candlelight. When the chatter dipped, she leaned toward me just enough for her whisper to land. Her tone wasn't sharp but dismissive, like my very presence was an intrusion tolerated only for optics. I didn't respond. I lifted my water, sipped, and let the silence stand. If she wanted me erased, then silence would be my weapon. Nathan arrived late as always when he wanted the spotlight. He guided Eleanor like a prize, chin tilted proudly. Applause erupted as if his mere presence sanctified the evening. He sat beside Mother, Eleanor glowing at his right, and launched into polished tales of his sacrifices, of his resilience, of building Ironvale brick by brick. Every line crafted for Victor Fairmont's ears, every detail sanded smooth to masquerade as truth. When he finally decided to acknowledge me, it came with a smirk that didn't touch his eyes. "Know your place, Adriana," Nathan said smoothly, the words delivered like advice but sharpened into a warning. "Keep your mouth shut, sign the papers, and don't disrupt the theater." The table laughed politely as if it were sibling teasing, but I caught the looks. My mother's fleeting approval. Eleanor's lips curling in disdain. And Victor Fairmont's silence. He didn't need to speak. His quiet was enough to make it clear. Signatures mattered, not blood. If Nathan kept me contained, Victor would let him wear the crown. I cut into my food, chewing slowly, deliberately. No retort. No flash of temper. Outwardly, I played their assigned role. The quiet soldier seated at the fringe, tolerated for appearance's sake. But within, my resolve hardened like steel. That email replayed in my mind, the one Eleanor carelessly exposed. Once she signs, she's done. She won't matter anymore. Arrogant, smug, certain. Nathan toasted Ironvale's bright future while my mother dabbed her lips with a napkin, neither aware that the empire they were celebrating had already begun to slip through their hands. My silence wasn't surrender. It was strategy. Each slight at that table only reminded me why I could never let them chain me into irrelevance. I had spent years constructing my own command web. Alliances, companies, founders who trusted me when no one else did. Nathan thought he had me cornered, but he was in my battlefield and every exit was mine. The dinner dragged on, shallow toasts and laughter that echoed hollow once it faded. I smiled when expected, murmured pleasantries when required. Let them think they had cowed me. Let them think I had folded. They would remember this night as the final time they mistook silence for weakness. When dessert came, Nathan raised his glass. "To family," he declared, and crystal clinked all around. I lifted mine too, though my thoughts drifted elsewhere. To family, yes, but not this table, not those who wielded bloodline as shackles. My loyalty now belonged to those who had trusted me in the shadows, to the empire I had built from nothing, to the self they had tried to erase but only forged sharper. I left the restaurant with my chin high and my lips sealed. They believed my quiet was submission. The decision had already been made. Tomorrow they would learn just how wrong they were. The wedding dawned under a flawless sky, the kind of light photographers prayed for. The Fairmont estate had been staged like a magazine spread. Rows of orchids lining the walkway, violins threading the air, waiters gliding in precision between tables. From the outside, it radiated permanence and power. From the inside, I knew better. I arrived exactly on time, not early enough to invite pleasantries, not late enough to draw attention. The ushers glanced at my invitation, traded a knowing look, and waved me vaguely toward the back. When I finally located my seat, I nearly laughed. A lonely table near the kitchen doors, so close to the service station I could hear chefs barking orders and smell the steam rising from trays. No name card. No folded linen. Just a wobbling chair tucked away as if I were staff waiting for orders. I sat without protest. My silence, sharper than any outburst, was enough. Eleanor swept past in lace and diamonds, pausing deliberately so her words would carry. "She doesn't command anything. Seat her with the crew." The line struck like a blade. For a moment the music faltered, or perhaps it was my own pulse hammering in my ears. My mother lowered her gaze. Nathan drained his glass without looking at me. Cousins smirked into their napkins. And then came the laughter. Low at first, then spreading, rippling like a cruel tide. It wasn't Eleanor's barb that cut deepest. Her cruelty was predictable. It was the silence of those who should have defended me. Family. Blood. The ones who had lived off the sacrifices I had made. That silence pierced harder than any insult. I folded my hands in my lap, gaze fixed on the untouched water before me. Each burst of laughter, each clink of cutlery, each whisper carved itself into my memory. I wanted to remember it all, the sting of erasure in plain sight, because it would fuel what came next. Even the staff passing by knew. Their apologetic glances said it clearly. This wasn't accident, it was punishment dressed as dismissal. Their way of declaring I was nothing, that my years of labor weighed less than the linens on the tables up front. Nathan raised his glass again, his voice booming with confidence. He thanked the Fairmonts. He thanked Eleanor. He thanked the guests for believing in his vision. He didn't thank me. He didn't even acknowledge my existence. To the room, I wasn't there. But I was watching. A smile ghosted across my lips, too controlled for anyone to notice. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss. They had no idea the soldier they had buried at the kitchen table had been laying mines for years. As the music swelled, I straightened in my chair, back rigid, head high, letting their silence weigh down one last time. It was the final insult, the last humiliation, and it was all the ammunition I needed. Their silence had not broken me. It had freed me. I slipped my phone from my clutch, its weight solid, steady, like the trigger of a weapon. Around me, champagne sparkled, violins soared, the bride preened, and Nathan basked in his false glory. No one noticed as I pressed a single contact. 3 words, delivered calm and final: cancel the contract. The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. He knew my authority. Confirmed, he said. And draft under your holding? Yes, I replied. Iron Veil is finished. I ended the call before the applause even faded. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. Waiters still balanced trays. Guests still laughed. Chandeliers still glittered. But then came the ripple. Nathan's smirk froze as his phone buzzed. Then again. And again. Message after message flooding in. Eleanor leaned close, whispering frantic questions. He didn't answer. His hand clenched his glass until I thought it might shatter. My mother frowned, sensing the shift. And then it came. Victor Fairmont's chair scraped against the polished floor, a sound like steel drawn from a sheath. He rose without ceremony, jaw locked, eyes fixed on Nathan with cold fury. A murmur spread as the billionaire adjusted his cufflinks and signaled his driver. I don't deal with amateurs, he said flatly. No toast. No congratulations. Just condemnation. Then he turned, his entourage following in his wake like shadows. The silence that followed hit heavier than any insult I'd endured on the battlefield. Guests shifted, whispers snaked across tables, all of them realizing something monumental had just cracked in the center of the celebration. Nathan shoved his chair back, nearly toppling it. His face drained, his hands trembled, his lips struggled to form words. Finally, too loud, too desperate, he shouted, "What did you do?" I lifted my water glass with unhurried calm, my eyes meeting his across the room. I reminded them who built this empire, I said evenly. I didn't need volume. Every ear in the hall caught it. Eleanor's flawless mask shattered, her practiced smile collapsing in front of her guests. My mother's pearls quivered against her collarbone, her breath unsteady. Relatives avoided my gaze. And Nathan, once untouchable, looked like a boy watching his fortress burn. Because that's what was happening. The foundation they had leaned on for years was disintegrating. One phone call. One decision. The $30 million deal had vanished like smoke, and the empire they paraded as theirs was slipping away, not behind closed doors but in front of everyone who mattered. I set the glass down, rose from my seat by the kitchen and strode past the stunned crowd. No explanation. No raised voice. Just silence and steel. At the doors I paused. Not for spectacle but long enough for the truth to settle. Nathan had always believed he could bury me in silence. Tonight I buried him with it. When I stepped into the night air, the chaos inside spilling into the courtyard, I felt lighter than I had in years. Iron Veil was dead. And I had killed it. The wedding ended in fractured whispers and shattered glass. By morning those whispers were headlines. Fairmont Capital pulled its commitment before the champagne lost its fizz. Reporters caught the scent of blood. By dawn, every outlet carried the story. Nathan Cole's grand merger had crumbled in public. The bride's family humiliated. Iron Veil exposed as fragile. Markets showed no mercy. At the opening bell, shares plunged 20% by noon, another 15% by close. Phones once buzzing with congratulations fell silent. Emails arrived, but they weren't contracts. They were terminations. Investors retreating, partners freezing deals, suppliers demanding guarantees Nathan couldn't deliver. He scrambled. Called an emergency board meeting. Pleaded for loyalty, begged for patience. Directors didn't bother. One claimed another engagement. Another lost connection, and never rejoined. Nathan sat alone at the head of a boardroom meant for victory, staring at blank screens, talking to no one. The press devoured it. Side-by-side images. Nathan beaming at the altar beside Eleanor, while red stock tickers plummeted underneath. Anchors called it one of the fastest implosions of a mid-tier empire in memory. Analysts speculated. Fractures, mismanagement, betrayal. Words he once hurled at me now clung to him. That evening my phone rang. My mother's voice carried a panic I'd only heard once before, when father died. "Adriana," she whispered breathless, why would you do this to your own family?" I let her stammer, let her desperation hang. Then I answered sharp as a blade, "Because you sat me by the kitchen." Silence filled the line. Not confusion. Recognition. She knew exactly what I meant. Every dismissal, every stolen credit, every time I was pushed aside until the only seat left was beside the swinging doors. She tried to speak but no words came. For once my mother was speechless. The next day Nathan faced cameras. Sweat gleamed under the lights. He spoke of resilience, of setbacks, of loyalty. But behind him real-time data scrolled Iron Vale's collapse. Reporters shouted questions about cancelled deals, failed leadership, family betrayal. His voice cracked, his hands trembled. Cameras caught it all. By week's end the empire he flaunted as indestructible was gone. Investors abandoned ship. Directors resigned. Lawsuits mounted. And the same world that once applauded Nathan now mocked him. The way they once laughed when Eleanor consigned me to the kitchen. The difference was I hadn't needed to shout. I hadn't needed to justify. I had spoken 3 words and they had done the rest. That night the city pulsed with light and motion outside my tower office. Bridges glowing, traffic threading like veins through the dark. Below, in a hotel courtyard, another wedding glittered with fairy lights and laughter. I watched it for a long moment. Weddings had become symbols to me, not of love but of masks. Families staging perfection while hiding rot. I thought back to that night at the kitchen table. The wobbling chair. The swinging doors. The heat of humiliation pressing into my skin while violins played for others. Could have broken me. For a moment it nearly did. But in truth that seat was the last gift they gave me. It reminded me who I truly was. A knock pulled me from the memory. One of my young executives entered with a file, hesitating when he saw me by the glass. His eyes flicked to the wedding below, then back at me. "Do you ever think about reconciling?" he asked carefully. "With your family?" I studied him. He was too young to grasp the weight of betrayal, too hopeful to understand how silence corrodes. For him family still meant shelter. For me it had always been a cage. I let the question linger, filling the room. Then I answered, steady, deliberate. I wasn't meant to sit in the kitchen. I was meant to own the building. The words landed like stone. His eyes widened, then he nodded slowly as if receiving a lesson he'd carry for life. I turned back to the window. The wedding below blurred in light and sound. Somewhere out there, Nathan was still clawing at the ruins, still spinning tales of resurgence. My mother was still rehearsing excuses for the press. Eleanor was still trying to salvage her facade. None of it mattered. Their empire was ashes. Mine was rising. Not on their acceptance, not on their approval, but on the strength they never believed I had. What the military taught me was simple. Power isn't in the seat you're given. It's in the ground you choose to leave and the fortress you choose to build. They tried to erase me. Instead they trained me. Behind me the office hummed with life. Phones ringing, deals closing, futures taking shape. The Cole Group wasn't just surviving. It was defining the next era. And I stood at its center, not as someone tolerated at the fringe of a banquet, but as the architect of the skyline. I lifted my glass, not champagne but water, cool and clear. A toast not to vengeance but to clarity. I had been invisible once. Never again. I didn't belong in the kitchen. I belonged here. And the building was mine. So Adriana's story ends. From a wobbling chair by the kitchen doors to the tallest tower, where the whole city looks up. This isn't just about revenge. It's about worth. About rising from silence and forging it into power. Her family's silence destroyed everything they thought they owned. Adriana proved that sometimes victory isn't about shouting to be heard, but waiting for the right moment to speak. 3 words that can bring an empire to its knees. Now I want to hear from you. Was Adriana ruthless? Or did she simply reclaim what was already hers? Have you ever been sidelined, underestimated, and longed to return stronger? Share your story in the comments. Because this isn't just Adriana's tale. It belongs to anyone who's ever been underestimated.